The smell is the first thing that hits you. Sulfur and charred cedar wood, fused with the stale perspiration of 1,000 pilgrims, deeply permeated into the temple's stone walls. Jerusalem, 8th century BCE. The atmosphere is dense, suffocating, like the maw of a furnace. And the prophet Isaiah's clamor reverberates through the white limestone walls with such force that it makes the very marrow tremble. He isn't proclaiming comfort. He's intoning a funeral dirge for a fallen monarch. And the words that pour from his lips are so unusual, so incomprehensible for mere earthly discourse that the priests present exchange furtive, sideways glances. Because the prophet isn't referring exclusively to Nebuchadnezzar. He's pointing to something primeval, something that already pulsated before the rocks of this sanctuary existed, before the peaks of Judah, even before the scent of sulfur and burnt wood. And right here lies the paradox that will tear this text in two, just like a veil. How does an entity, engendered in absolute perfection, manage to transmute into the very embodiment of chaos? How is it possible that the pinnacle of creation descends into the deepest abyss? This is the core of the exegesis we will address today. The genesis of the adversary. Not the comic book villain, nor that red-horned caricature inherited from medieval European folklore that never graced the sacred pages. We're talking about the real entity. A being detailed in the scriptures with an archaeological rigor that 21st century researchers are only just beginning to process. But before we dive into the original code, stop for a moment. Because there's a common thread between this revelation and your current existence, something the ordinary mind fails to decipher, and it will manifest clearly at the conclusion of this stage. We're going to uncover the Hebrew terms, those roots that the original language exposes as the absolute axis for understanding who this being was before corrupting into Satan. The word is Hillel. It means the one who shines, the resplendent one, the one who emits light. Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12. The Hebrew manuscript states Hillel ben Shahar, literally the son of the dawn, the one who shines at daybreak. The Latin translation rendered it as Lucifer, and Lucifer simply denotes light bearer. So prior to any collapse, before the first rebellion, this creature possessed an identity intrinsically fused with light. But not just any radiance, it was the light of the sunrise, the most fragile, beautiful, and ephemeral glow that exists, that which survives barely seconds before the sun devours the horizon. Now you need to grasp what is truly happening in Isaiah's lines under their exact historical framework. Because if you omit this, you will read the prophecy as a simple poetic allegory and waste 70% of its message. We are located in the Neo-Assyrian era, approximately between 777 and 738 BCE, under the rule of Tiglath-Pileser III. The excavations of ancient Nineveh, specifically the reports released by the British Museum since the time of Austin Henry Layard in the 19th century, have unveiled a palatial cosmology where the Assyrian sovereign was erected as the incarnation of the gods on the earthly plane. The king did not merely govern, he personified the cosmic order. And Isaiah, addressing an audience that perfectly understood this political iconography, employs the rite of the funeral lament, called kinah in Hebrew. It is a poetic meter of 3 and 2 beats, a rhythm that descends sharply, like someone slipping down a staircase, to recount the collapse of a monarch who believed himself to be divine. The Greek language uncovers another dimension when we reach the New Testament. In Luke 10, verse 18, Jesus utters a phrase that should silence any debate. I saw Satan fall from heaven like lightning. The Greek verb used here is etheruon, the imperfect form of theoreo. And in Koine Greek, the imperfect indicates an action that the observer contemplated continuously and repeatedly. It was not an isolated, fleeting event. It was something the Messiah witnessed occurring uninterruptedly. The term for lightning in Aramaic, Christ's native tongue, is barak, and it falls from heaven, Shemayim, the most exalted sphere of existence. This isn't metaphorical decoration. It is archaeology of the invisible, a precise coordinate, the absolute apex of the created cosmos.
To truly assimilate this with density, you must delve into the second crucial document, Ezekiel chapter 28. And here, the plot becomes denser than any medieval theologian could conceive. The geopolitical landscape differs from Isaiah's. We are situated around 593 BCE. Babylon is devouring the ancient world. Nebuchadnezzar II has already ravaged Jerusalem, and the exiles survive on the banks of the Chebar River in modern-day central Iraq. Ezekiel is an exiled priest who receives visions that he himself recounts with utmost caution, invariably using the word demut, resemblance, appearance, because he is aware that he is contemplating something for which human vocabulary lacks capacity. In chapter 28, the Creator orders Ezekiel to intone a lament, again a kina, over the monarch of Tyre. This city was the most prosperous Phoenician jewel in the entire Mediterranean. Underwater explorations led by the National Museum of Beirut and Tel Aviv University in recent decades have brought to light the vestiges of docks that dominated all Eastern maritime trade. The king of Tyre not only possessed incalculable riches, commercially, he was untouchable. However, Ezekiel's text performs a maneuver that no conventional political discourse would dare to do. It transcends the human leader. Verse 13, "You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering. The sardius, topaz, diamond, chrysolite, onyx, jasper, sapphire, carbuncle, and emerald. The workmanship of your tambourines and flutes was prepared for you on the day you were created." No ruler of Tyre ever set foot in Eden. No mortal is described wearing precious minerals as the structure of their own anatomy. This language does not apply to a human being. And the text corroborates this in verse 14, employing a truly astonishing Hebrew expression. Kerub mimshach hasokech, the anointed cherub. Or in a stricter translation, the cherub of the covering, of protection, of guardianship. The word cherub, plural cherubim, is one of the densest in all biblical tradition. In the excavations of the palace of Khorsabad in Syria and in Megiddo, Israel, effigies of hybrid creatures with attributes of eagle, lion, bull, and man have been found. They were the Akkadian caribou, guardian entities that flanked sacred thresholds. The Israel Antiquities Authority has documented ivories in Megiddo dated to the late Bronze Age, circa 1200 BCE, that show these figures carved in a watchful attitude around a throne. And the passage in Ezekiel states that this specific being was on the holy mountain of God, walking among stones of fire, positioned as the guardian of the Eternal's own throne. It is right here that most analyses stop. They describe the rank and move on to another topic. But there exists a connection that 99% of readers have overlooked, and it lies in a single word in verse 15. The Hebrew uncovers the word tamim, perfect, blameless, without blemish. You were perfect in your ways from the day you were created.
The trilateral root is tav, mim, mim. It is the same one that appears in the book of Job to categorize him as an upright man. It appears in Genesis to describe Noah, and it is used in Leviticus to define unblemished animals suitable for sacrifice.
Tamim is not a literary hyperbole. It's a technical designation of supreme quality, an auditable purity without the slightest internal flaw. And then, the sentence bursts forth that should shake the very foundations of your theology about evil. Until iniquity was found in you. The Hebrew verb employed is nimtza, the passive nifal form of the verb matzah, to find, to discover. This passive voice is not a grammatical accident. It carries a colossal theological weight. Iniquity was not injected into him from the outside. It was discovered within him. Like someone who probes and finds something that already resided there in a latent state, awaiting the choice that would bring it to light. This raises a question that will demolish any lazy justification for the origin of darkness. If this creature was tamim, perfect, how could it harbor iniquity within itself? The answer does not lie in a divine assembly error. It is found in the Hebrew concept of kavod, glory, weight, substance, and in the collision that occurs when a being designed to reflect that weight determines that it wishes to become the absolute weight itself instead of merely mirroring it. To decode this with the rigor that the scriptures demand, you must scrutinize the root of the name this being holds, both in Hebrew and in Greek, and the impact this has on the battle you yourself are fighting at this precise moment. Every time you decide between the target and the deviation, between the tamim and the nimtza. That is what we will analyze next. The code is always hidden in the name. In Hebrew, the Old Testament uses the term Satan, adversary, accuser, the one who stands in the way. Its verbal root carries the action of obstructing, of blocking passage, of raising charges before a court. It is not an original given name. It is a function, a posture adopted. The Greek of the New Testament not only transliterated it as Satanas, but also added another noun of devastating weight, diabolos, the slanderer, the one who throws projectiles to divide. It comes from the root diabalein, to throw against, to pierce with accusations. When you pronounce the word devil, you are invoking an active function, a being whose sole reason for existence is to shoot accusations, insert wedges, and fracture what the Creator has joined. But there exists a third nomenclature in the texts, and this is what will illuminate everything we have been building. The Hebrew reveals in Isaiah 14:12 the title Halel ben Shahar, Son of the Dawn. The Septuagint, the Greek version of the Old Testament, translated it as Heiasphoros, the bearer of the morning light. And Jerome, when translating it into Latin in the Vulgate, stamped the word Lucifer, the light bearer. It is there that the name the whole world recognizes emerges. Analyze the paradox. The being who ended up mutating into the very incarnation of darkness had embedded in his identity the mission to transport the light. He was not the light, he was its vehicle, the polished mirror destined to bounce the glory of the throne, the designated emissary to carry the Creator's clarity to unexplored corners. And it was exactly this entrustment, this privilege of extreme proximity with the original source, that acted as the detonator of his collapse. Because there is an unbridgeable abyss between transporting the light and being the light, between projecting someone else's glory and claiming it as one's own. The manuscript of Isaiah 14 documents 5 lethal decrees that, in the original language, begin with the same premise. I will ascend. I will be like. I will raise my throne. I will sit. I will be equal. It is the exact algorithm of the thought that unleashed internal ruin. The Hebrew shows that the nuclear verb of these 5 proclamations is e'ele, derived from the root Allah, to ascend, to climb, the longing to climb beyond the assigned coordinates. It is not the legitimate impulse to progress, but the absolute refusal to remain a creature. Ezekiel 28 closes this circuit with a word we should never overlook. When narrating the creation of this entity, the Hebrew verb is bara, the same one used in Genesis 1:1 when God originates the heavens and the earth. Bara does not mean to remodel or recycle pre-existing matter. It is the verb of absolute genesis, the one that calls into existence that which was not. This cherub was brought into reality with the same command of power that structured the entire universe. And it was this sublime privilege of existing that he wielded as a weapon against his own maker. We now arrive at the core issue that many scholars avoid confronting. If this being was designed impeccably, tamim, how did iniquity come to be within him? This is not rhetoric, it is the backbone of theodicy and of any serious investigation into the genesis of evil. The key begins with a distinction that Greek philosophy often overlooks, but that Hebrew thought has anchored in its linguistic roots. The perfection of a created being is not equivalent to uncreated holiness. God is holy by essence. His goodness is not a skill he exercises at will or can suspend. It is what he is. He does not opt to be good. Just as the sun does not decide to emit light, it simply illuminates because that is its radiant nature. However, the creature, any creature, even one designed under the Tamim code, is perfect by delegation, by donation. Its purity is a borrowed reflection, conditioned by its permanent connection to the source of origin. And here lies the fact that every theologian should engrave in their mind before debating free will. A perfect creation does not cease to be a creation. It remains a receiver. And everyone who receives can reach the critical moment of no longer wanting to receive, of desiring to become the spring itself. This does not imply a flaw in the Creator's engineering. It is the unavoidable toll of authentic love. Because a programmed love, incapable of being rejected, is mere robotics, not devotion. And God, whose essence is pure love, forged intelligences capable of genuine reciprocity, which necessarily demands the capacity for real rejection. The anointed cherub exercised that rejection, and iniquity, Ninsaya, was discovered in him. But there is an even deeper exegetical layer, a stratum that traditional pulpits rarely touch, and that links the collapse of this entity directly to your own biological and spiritual code. In Genesis 3, the Hebrew describes the serpent in the garden as arum, cunning, subtle. The root is identical to that of the term used for nakedness, erome. There is a tactic of exposure here, a stripping away. The entity that was once armored with fiery gems, as Ezekiel 28 confirms, clothed in borrowed glory, now maneuvers as the agent who exposes, who strips bare, who snatches away the covering of others. He lost his own protection and specialized in dismantling that of others. And notice his modus operandi. In the garden, he does not use physical force. He does not raise his voice or threaten. he throws a simple question. Has God indeed said? The Greek of the Septuagint uses the aorist of legein, to say. But what is crucial is the effect the question generates in the recipient's mental hardware. He does not refute the divine directive directly. He injects it with doubt. He installs a virus of uncertainty where full trust once operated. He invites the creature to set itself up as a tribunal for the word of its maker. That is his algorithm, always the same pattern. 2 millennia later, in the desert, he replicates the architecture of the attack with millimeter precision against Jesus Christ himself. If you are the Son of God. He does not formulate a direct denial, but a conditional, a poisoned seed questioning identity. Because the Diabolos is the one who divides, and the most destructive fracture does not occur between two people, but within the individual, between their true identity and what they are made to believe they are. We have now reached the vortex that must...
It would take your breath away. This entire chronicle about the genesis of Satan isn't just a story about some mythological creature in another dimension. It's the X-ray of the internal territory of any being endowed with the power of choice. The 5 proclamations of Isaiah 14 aren't just ancient history. They are the exact sequence that executes in the human mind when man decides that his kavod, his own weight, must crush the kavod of God. The Apostle Paul, when drafting his epistles, uses the Greek term phronema sarkos, the mind of the flesh, the operating system centered on the earthly. And he categorizes it as enmity against God. He doesn't call it weakness or ignorance. He labels it active hostility. It's the same root as Satan. When a human being declares themselves the center of their own universe, they don't commit a simple moral slip. They are replicating on a human scale the same bug of pride that transformed the anointed cherub into the accuser of the brethren. It's at this point where Charles Spurgeon emphatically insisted every time he preached about the fall. Sin is not, in the first instance, a failure of conduct. It's a failure of trajectory, of objective. It's about which kavod the creature is subordinate to. The Hebrew verb to sin, chata, means to miss the mark. It's not just performing an improper action. It's aiming at the wrong coordinates. It's having altered the magnetic north of your soul.
And now, the closing code. The only being in history who confronted the Diabolos in the deepest core of this matrix and did not collapse was the one who in Gethsemane confronted the same temptation of Isaiah 14, but in the strictly opposite sense. The eternal being who held the absolute ontological right to glory, who didn't need to climb positions because he himself was the summit, opted for a deliberate emptying. Philippians 2 expounds in Greek the verb ekenosen, from the root keneo, to empty. He who was the very substance of glory reduced himself to the hardware of the flesh, a radical inversion of Hillel's movement. While the cherub forced an illegitimate ascent to a foreign throne, the Son programmed a voluntary descent into a humiliation that was not his. And on the cross, the accuser unleashed his lethal offensive. The transgressions of all human history were loaded onto that body. The nakedness, the exposure of Eden was completely absorbed. Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, declared John the Baptist. And the Greek verb airo isn't limited to carry. It means to lift, to extirpate, and to make disappear. What was detected within the rebellious creature, that iniquity nimsa,
was eradicated by the only being who possessed the code tamim, not by loan, but by perpetual nature.
The genesis of Satan isn't just simple trivia for scholars or mystical speculation. It's the indispensable black screen for the lightning of the cross to explode with its maximum luminosity. Because only when you understand the deviation the light bearer chose at the origin do you truly grasp the crushing weight of what the sun chose in the end. Where one creature rejected dependence and collapsed into darkness, the very author of light embraced the crucifixion, formatting the only real escape route from the server where the adversary operates. This isn't just a simple legend about a fallen angel. It's the technical report that demonstrates why your system desperately needs a savior.